Good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekly Livestock Market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us is University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
All right, not a ton for us to talk about this week, but before we get into the big news of the week, which I assume everybody is talking about, that USMCA or the new updated NAFTA, let's talk about what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, if we start on the cattle side of the picture first, Megan, we look at live cattle, cash cattle prices for the week. They're really basically unchanged from where we were a week ago. So we've actually seen a lot of stability in cash fed cattle prices the last 2 weeks or so. On the feeder cattle side, we are actually up again, steady to 6 higher this week in terms of feeder cattle prices. On the cash side, if we look at the future side of the equation, December live cattle futures were down 90 cents this week, while those November feeder cattle futures were basically unchanged on the week. On the beef side of the equation, the choice box beef price was down nearly 70 cents this week, and we really saw a lot of weakness across the board. Chucks, loins, briskets, short plank, plate, and flank are all lower this week. When you look at the hog side of the equation, we're up again this week in terms of barrel and gilt prices. It's nice to be talking about higher prices for yet another week, with those cash barrel and gilt prices more than $2 higher this week. When we look at the lean hog futures contract for December, it was down about 50 cents this week. On the pork cutout value, down slightly, but really unchanged on that pork cutout value from where we were a week ago, as we saw some weakness in loins and ribs, but that was more than almost offset by what we saw in terms of higher belly prices.
Scott, on the cash hog side of things, are we maybe seeing some of that recent, maybe are we starting to see things slow down a little bit, maybe taking a step back because we saw such large gains so quickly?
Yeah, I think we are starting to see maybe a little bit of that occurring in the market as again, I think there was a lot of discussion about things like African swine fever and what it really meant. And much of that, we don't know the true effects at the end of the day. And so we got a nice recovery from maybe what was a too negative scenario that was unfolding for a period of time, moving those markets back to maybe better levels relative to where supply and demand really sit.
My other question is, how concerned are we watching hog weights? We saw almost 2 pound or a pound and a half jump from a week ago. We've seen some pretty large slaughter runs again this week. Is that only going to get bigger and that those weights get a little bit higher until we get caught up from the slowdown and or shut down after Hurricane Florence?
So I do think we have to work through more hogs, and that might primarily be a Smithfield issue, but it does affect overall hog weights, that we're going to have to deal with. And I still worry we got big runs coming before we get to the end of the year, even almost regardless of what was a result of the slowdown as a result of the hurricane. So I do think we have plentiful supplies of hogs between now and the end of the year to get through. I'm not concerned we have big issues coming, but we may have some larger kills yet to deal with before we get through the end of 2018.
Well, it got a little bit of good news, or the market got a shot of good news today with when it comes in terms of domestic demand, and an incredible number as we take a look at that jobs and unemployment rate.
Yes, we really got quite a mixed bag as we look through and positive at the end of the day. The 3.7% unemployment rate that we fell to in this report, lowest since 1969. Certainly is a boost for us, I think. When you look at the actual jobs report, we added 134,000 jobs in September. That was below the expected gain. Things like the hurricane, I think, might have had some effect in terms of that current jobs number. So we'll see where we come back next month as we get through some of those hurricane effects, at least from a jobs standpoint. I will say the other positive part for me is when you look back at the August revisions that we got in the report today, we revised up the August additional jobs to 270,000. That's up from the original 201. So a really nice revision to those August numbers, as well as when you look at wage rates, 2.8% higher than where we were last month. I think that certainly spells some positive news from a domestic demand standpoint for beef and pork products.
Other positive news, last Friday's Restaurant Performance Index. Talk to me a little bit about what we saw there and what that means.
Yeah, so I think it really correlates very nicely with the jobs report that we got today. When you look at that restaurant performance index that we got last Friday, is that overall index for August set at 102. That compares to where we were in July of a 101.1 index. But maybe even more importantly is you look at that current situation index that we got out of the report last Friday, setting at 102.3. We've kind of just been slightly above year ago levels for much of what we've seen in 2018, and now to come in with this strong report or strong number for that current situation index, same store sales setting at 103.7. All of that just suggests some pretty good current demand is occurring, and we're not just seeing a increase in that overall restaurant performance index just because of expectations.
All right, Scott, to wrap things up this week, really the big news of the week is this USMCA, the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement. Finally, we've been talking about what a deal potentially means for us. We've got a lot of ground, I'm assuming, to make up a little bit. What are we looking at, and how is the livestock sector maybe digesting some of the news this week?
Yeah, so I think you have to say it's nothing but positive to finally get to the end of the road here with U.S. Mexico Canada update to NAFTA, if you will. I think there is some positives to that. I keep reminding us that we might not see that much additional exports here in the short run, but I do think the value of those exports might return to nicer levels. Things like ham prices that might get us a little more pop that could be helpful as we hopefully get higher valued ham products back into Mexico. Because to me, that's been much of what we've seen is that we didn't lose a lot of volume, but we sure lost value as those tariffs were put in place. I still think we have some work to do there, however, because those tariffs aren't gone at this point. So we'll see how quickly we de-escalate some of the tariffs that we have in place in a number of products.
And obviously, there's still a lot of hurdles for it to clear before it makes it to the president's desk and implementation begins. I would have to say, looking at some of the highlights of that agreement, though, is a line in there where it talks about not being able to sign trade agreements or negotiate trade agreements with other markets. And the one that comes to my mind would be China.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that we're all going to work together in terms of opening access to those other markets, and we're not going to do that as individual countries. Whether that you feel that's good or bad for us, I guess depends on who you think has the competitive advantage with you, if you will, to some of those new market opportunities. In some ways, it might make it a little easier as countries also like China can't pick us off one at a time. They know they have to negotiate really across the board with the three of us as those markets come open. But it is an important piece of what we see out of that agreement that we'll have to pay attention to and ultimately decide how that implementation occurs at the end of the day.
Scott, what are we looking ahead to for next week?
I think when you look at reports next week, we're going to have a pretty full slate for us. We get monthly trade data out next Tuesday, and then USDA will give us another monthly WASDE report. See just where that corn and soybean crop ultimately ended up, see if we continue to see it growing. We get retail prices and another shot of consumer confidence here at the end of next week.
All right, Scott, we will talk to you next Friday. Have a great weekend.
You do the same, Megan.
To have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there. And for market updates twice daily, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner on Brownfield.